Martin, I want to ask you as an attorney, and then going into this and watching 1.0, watching that lead statement when David Yanney gets up and that great famous statement, Karen Reed was framed. Do you think that was a little bit too much for the jury? And do you think that they're going to tailor their defense this time around? And maybe, because I know that we talk a lot about it here, and I think, I did a poll in one of my last shows, or the second to last show I did, and I said, what way will the defense kind of lean this time? Are we going to go down that framed route, or do we just keep hammering home reasonable doubt? And before you answer, to let you know, I went back and watched the opening and closing argument from the defense. And I'm going to ask you, how many times do you think they said reasonable doubt in either one of those statements?
I would say 0.
It was 3.
It was 3 times?
3. It was
okay.
3 times.
I know it was very little because it's something that stuck out of my mind. And Brian, no offense, but I see that you're not following my channel so much because I spoke about this specifically a number of times while I was covering this case.
Sure.
And I thought, and I've said this before, and I'm going to, tell it to your audience as well. I think that it was not the greatest way to go about it, presenting this defense by saying that she was framed. And also this third party culprit idea. The evidence is coming in. All that evidence that you want in for the third-party culprit is coming in one way or the other. The only question is going to be, are you going to argue to the jury, it wasn't Karen Reed, it was these 2 other people, instead of letting everybody know how the inadequacies of this investigation and how you got the ARCA experts. So we don't know who did it. Somebody other than Karen did it. When Alan Jackson said that, at some point, we don't know who did it. Somebody other. I thought that's very compelling. When he did that in that interview, that's a compelling argument. And when you say this framed and you say that she was framed, it's almost, again, it's like you're shifting the burden onto yourself to prove that she was framed. Let's say the jury doesn't buy that she was framed, but the jury finds that there are some problems with the investigation. Well, they may feel like I have to choose, was she framed or was she not? The defense is saying she was framed. I'm not convinced that she's framed. There's a lot of questions with the investigation. Maybe if they would have done it properly, they would have had some other suspects that they could have followed up and maybe they would have got somebody. But to say that she was framed, to say that there's a conspiracy, it's funny. The difference between conspiracy and cover up, there's a fine line between that. I think that there's definitely evidence of somewhat of a cover-up, meaning that certain people were protected. That house wasn't searched. So if you want to include that in, your language of this could have been some sort of cover-up, some sort of, and not cover up as, we know exactly what happened, we're trying to cover up, but we're trying to protect certain people. And that's what's guiding this investigation instead of the search for the truth. So I think that exactly like you do, Brian, that I don't think that the stress should be, the emphasis should be on the framed part, or the emphasis should be on the conspiracy or the third party culprits. Who did it? Was it Brian Higgins? Was it Brian Albert? Was it Colin Albert? Who was involved? I think that that's a little bit distracting. And I think that if you just focus on how inadequate this investigation was and how there's so much evidence and facts that are screaming reasonable doubt, especially when you have the ARC experts, which I'm sure we're going to get into soon, that I think it's much more palatable to the jury, and you'll get your acquittal, I think, a little bit easier that way. Now, the other problem is that it seems that they've been posturing this entire time this is a conspiracy. So at the trial, they're going to, to kind of suck it up and not argue what you've been telling everybody for the past, 3 years. It's just hard to do that. But I think just strategically, I think you're 100% right that they should kind of shy away a little bit from the framed, from the conspiracy, and just focus on how much there's just a mountain of reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and I think it's like a hard pill for a lot of us free Karen readers to swallow, because we know what happened. I mean, it just adds up in our head. And now to kind of shift, let's change the direction this time. And I think that the Reed team did learn a lot from the first trial, especially having the interview with juror Ronnie on Turtle Boy's show. I mean, I think that was phenomenal pieces of evidence, to get feedback from what happened in that jury room. But I want to go to Todd really quick too. And we were talking about this before the show started, in talking, and maybe this is why it didn't play well with the jury. Todd, we were talking backstage about, what happens when we grow up? What do our parents and, maybe our authority figures or our teachers in school tell us? Well, respect authority, respect the cops. Maybe that didn't play as well with the jury with this framed angle. Scott, Scott, I'm sorry about that. Todd, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Brian, as we were talking offline, when we hear things like frames, someone being framed by the police department, or, the crooked cops, we it, seeing law enforcement misconduct is not rare. But when we drill down to framing someone that's on trial for murder, we never see that, right? That's Hollywood. That's stuff that we see on the big screen.
Mhm.
And so, to your point about trusting the police, it's ingrained in us, in our American culture, from we're old enough to engage and say hi to a police officer. And I remember parents would say, "Oh, if you don't behave, this policeman's going to arrest you."
Yeah.
And I would come back with, "No, right? Police officers are your friends." And so I was trying to shift that narrative, but I contributed to that. Trust the police. Trust the police. We're your friends. And so you grow up with that sense and that mindset. So they've got so much to focus on with the inadequacies of the investigation. They'll get their reasonable doubt.
Mm.
They're right there. They don't have to embellish. There's a lot of low hanging fruit for the defense.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think all the puzzle pieces are there. It's just connecting it and having it resonate with the jury. It's not far off the tree, like you said. I mean, it's all there.